Hey, so today we're talking about something that can make or break a line marking project, and that of course is the weather. Now, by the end of the session, I wanted you guys to know more about the temperature, the humidity, the rain, even wind can impact your line marking results, and most importantly, how to adapt to different weather conditions to ensure that your line markings come out perfect. So first up, why does the weather matter? Well, the environmental factors like the temperature, humidity, they directly affect the curing of the paints, as well as how well they stick, how long they take to dry, and how durable they're going to be. And if the conditions aren't right, you could end up with sort of premature wear or poor quality finish. So we'll dive into how to work with different weather conditions. So first up, let's talk about temperature. Now, temperature plays a huge role in line marking, and most paints work best between 10 and 25 degrees, sometimes a bit at 5 degrees. But in cold weather below 5 degrees, the paint can dry too slowly, it becomes brittle. In hot weather above 30 or 35, the paint can dry too fast, leading to a poor adhesion. We call that flash curing. And the key is to work early in the morning or late in the afternoon during extreme heat, or postpone the job until a cooler day, or below 5 degrees, I just couldn't do the job. Now, I know I've done installations during extreme heat, and I've come to regret it when the paints have refused to dry. I'm left with an absolute mess on the floor, and it won't fully cure. It's taking days in some cases to go off. So next, we talk about the precipitation and humidity. Now, moisture, like you can see today, the rain is an absolute enemy of line marking, and never ever apply paint or line markings just after it's rained. My advice is, if you're going to line mark when it's rained, at least a few hours afterwards you want to wait. You can use some forced drying, such as using one of the gas dryers we've got here, an HCA, or even a turbine system. But working on concrete, I would dry anyway, as a matter of course, even if it doesn't look wet, because concrete is an absolute bugger, and often the moisture sits right below the surface when you can't even see it. So I would always dry concrete. Next one's humidity. Now, humidity is important to slow down and speeds up drying time, and you need to wait longer if it's high humidity for the paint to dry, while a low humidity can cause the paint to dry too quickly. Both of them cause issues. So actually dry too quickly is also bad, really, because what you'll get is this flash drying that I mentioned, where the surface dries, the paint underneath remains wet, and when you traffic it afterwards and drive over it, you'll actually find the paint sort of like squelches and bubbles out the sides, leaving a real mess on the ground to clean up. I know I've been there so many times myself. Now, most manufacturers don't go into a great deal of detail on paintings and the ideal humidity, but you should have a good understanding by taking the lid off the tin. And if it starts to skin over within a matter of minutes, chances are the temperature is too high or the humidity is too low, perhaps, as well. You want to aim between 40 and 70% humidity. So on to wind and dust control. You may not think that wind and dust control can be a major issue when it comes to line marking, but it really, really is. I've been there many times when, I've cleaned a car park, getting all the leaves and dust up off the ground, only to have the wind literally blow back over the lines that have just been ground prepared, or even worse, if you just painted it and the wind carries all the dust on top of it and it just sticks to it, and it's an absolute bugger. Or if it's freshly primed as well, you've basically got to start the whole thing again if it's just been primed. So even, after saying, like, once you've painted it, it can create like a really rough finish to wind and sort of dust and debris, so you kind of want to avoid it if it's too windy. You can block the wind with different things. You can use vehicles, you can set up some barriers. You can also get like a small plate that goes around the spray sort of gun itself and stops it sort of blowing out the side. Now, one of the things I find when it comes down to sort of spray applications and markings, you've got to have the spray tip raised high enough above the ground so you'll actually get the paint being sort of, at the right sort of angle and the right pressure. But that's really where you can get oversprayed as well if you've got the wind sort of picking up quite high. You end up with the paint sort of splattering out too far at the sides. And that's what I'm saying, you should also look at guarding to go around the spray tip as well. So anyway, best tip I think for managing the weather: always check the forecast before starting a job. Stay flexible with your schedule, because the weather does change suddenly. It was sunny here earlier. It changes pretty quickly. It always seems, when you're doing a job in front of a client, that seems to be when it goes wrong, of course. So one of the key things I would say is make sure you keep that communication sort of open with your client. Let them know if you do need to change anything. Use a fast drying paint in unpredictable weather, and apply thinner coats in colder conditions to avoid that sort of bubbling and cracking that you can get. Now, as I mentioned, it is important to, or extremely important to have a plan for communicating weather delays with clients, keeping them informed. It really just helps them sort of manage expectations and prevent the frustration. I know I've been there myself when people get upset. So look, here's a quick checklist, and I've got one below you can download. Make sure the temperature is in the right range. we want to be aiming sort of 10 to 25 degrees, 30 at sort of maximum, 5 at sort of lowest point possible. This will be displayed on the side of most of the paint tins that you get as well. Also check the humidity and moisture level. So if you think it's going to be too humid or too wet, postpone the job. Better to have it rearranged and not incur the cost of doing the job twice, or worse, upsetting your customer when it comes up and still needs to get redone 6 months down the line. Have a rain contingency plan. My advice, when it rains, just don't do the job. Simple as that. I know it's a pain, especially when you've got multiple jobs booked in and you need to move customers back, to the back of the queue. But line markings that come up within a matter of months really only reflects poorly on you as an installer, and nobody remembers the weather a couple of months down the line. So it's only going to reflect onto you. And of course, with the wind, shield it as much as possible around the spray tips to stop any sort of blowouts or sort of paint sort of getting everywhere. Really, just make sure you sort of pay attention to the wind. Now, I appreciate it's a lot easier said than done. Sometimes it is easy just to postpone a job though when it's windy. And I can think of probably 2 or 3 times I've only ever had to do that out of literally hundreds and hundreds of jobs. So I think that, one of the key things I would say for any project, make sure you understand the weather conditions on it, make sure that you understand the impact that it's going to have on your paints, how quickly they get dry, whether they won't dry at all. It'll just help you get professional finishes every single time. In the next session, we're going to be talking about the weather apps we use, and typically the sort of threshold I would have gone and when we wouldn't attend, and when I would look to postpone jobs. And it's always a tricky one, because one thing I find is when I've got a customer booked in for a job, let's say today, it started to rain, it's chucking down all day, the customer often expects you to then come in the very next day and carry that job out, but that's just not practical. The chances are, if you're like me, you've got 3 or 4 weeks worth of projects booked in, you can't just move, that might be 20 customers. I can't just move 20 customers because it's rained for a day. I end up having to put that customer to the back of the queue and say, I'm really sorry, you'll also be back in 3 weeks' time. Now, I know that causes frustration, but I would have to otherwise upset 20 people moving them. And if it rained again, I'd have to move them all 20 again. And if it rained again third time, which literally in the space of 3 weeks, it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect it to rain 3 times, I would be moving 60 sort of project movements, if you like, upsetting 20 different customers 3 times. That's really poor show. Far better to just upset one person and move them to the back. But you don't have to actually upset them. One of the things I find is just easier to have the conversation with your client up front and say, look, the paint can only go down between this temperature and this temperature, and if it rains, it will take around 3 weeks for us to get you booked back in. That's because we don't like to cancel lots of other people, just like we wouldn't for you. So if your project's booked in for tomorrow and it rains on this customer the day before, we're not going to cancel you. We're going to make that customer go to the next sort of available date. We're not going to say we're putting you to the back of the queue. We'll just say we'll give you the next available date, which is roughly 3 to 4 weeks, or whatever your lead time is going to be. Don't say it's at the back of the queue bag. But it's always worth talking to your customer about that before you even start the project, and just say, look, if it rains, here's my plan. We're going to move you to the next available, which is approximately here. That's what the plan would be. But hopefully that won't happen. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this session. As I said, in the next one, I'm going to be showing you the weather apps we use, the sort of thresholds and sort of points I would say, like, this is when we're going to go to a job, this is when we're going to postpone a job. Let's dive into that one, and I'll see you guys after that.